Hello and welcome to SMPD, the podcast where we look back at the cartoons that shaped our childhood. I am Chris Bolton. With me, as always, my cartoon companion, Mr. Mark Williams.
Hello.
And this episode, we are looking back at probably the newest show we've ever done, SpongeBob Squarepants. I say probably the newest. We have done some kind of 2000s content, haven't we? But
we've done some late 90s, early aughts, but I think this one probably ran longer because I think technically this is still active. I don't think they've done anything. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if they've done any new seasons for a while. I know they've done a couple of films on that, but I think technically it's still down as, like on Wiki, it's down as 99 to present.
Yeah, I always assumed SpongeBob was still a thing. I'm certainly still watching episodes that I've never seen before. Netflix has got 3 seasons.
Yeah, they've got 4, 8 to 9. But yeah, I don't know whether there's, but I think they've done, it's something like 15 seasons they've done or something. They had a bit of a hiatus to do the films.
Well, it was also the creator passed away, and they had to hand creative control over and stuff like that as well. So there was...
Well, the creator had already stepped down at that point because he, I was reading about it earlier. He after the film, he gave up control anyway. He resigned as the showrunner.
Yeah, so Steve Hillenburg we're talking about here. We're calling him the creator. But yeah, Steve Hillenburg, he was a person. He had a name.
Yeah, I couldn't remember what it was. That was my issue.
So he did step down, but he came back in some sort of unspecified.
Yeah, I think he
creative...
was effectively a consultant. I think, wasn't he?
Yes,
I think
yes,
he stayed involved. I think.
Yeah. So yeah, it still trundles on despite all of that. Now, whether the current content is as good as the old content is up for debate.
I'm not sure. I mean, I did the same as you. I picked up the ones on Netflix, which are kind of mid-run. I think the season 4, season 8, and season 9, and they are quite tonally different. You can see there's a very different, very definite shift in them. The newer ones I haven't seen, and I didn't bother trying to track those down. I thought there's 3 seasons on Netflix that'll do me for this.
Yeah, I mean, I could never tell you at any given point what season of SpongeBob I'm watching. Such is my relationship with the show. It's almost in that kind of Simpsons / Flintstones / Jetsons / Scooby-Doo kind of camp where there are just so many episodes of this and it's constantly on.
Yeah.
And this isn't something that I can necessarily say I've ever been a huge fan of, but it's also something that I can hand on heart say that I don't think I have ever turned away from ever. Like if SpongeBob is on, I will sit down and watch SpongeBob.
Yeah, I think
I've thoroughly enjoyed watching it for this podcast as well. It's just not something that I'm going to sit down and binge like I would with some of the other shows that we've been watching. Yeah. But it's certainly something that I've enjoyed. We say these are the shows that shaped our childhood. I think it's actually pretty fair to say SpongeBob had a large part in shaping my early adulthood because it was always on when I was in my 20s, everywhere you looked.
Well, I mean, from a terrestrial TV point of view, it was on ITV on SMTV on a Saturday morning. And I remember when they broke it, it would have been probably not long after it started airing on Nick, and they'd have 2 double episodes every Saturday. So you'd have they would basically be an hour of their content. So for them it was ideal. But yeah, so I used to see it, and it was one of those where I used to work on a Saturday morning. But then occasionally I'd be slightly hungover and couldn't go to work on a Saturday morning. And so it was one of those, you think, I'll check the TV on. I'll be sat in front of the TV and it would be on. And it was anarchic and chaotic enough that it would just lift you out of that sort of fog and go, oh, okay, that's a bit interesting. Whereas a lot of the other stuff that was on Saturday morning, went, oh, fucking hell, where's the remote? I want to turn it off. This wasn't that. And it was, for me, it was that good way of sort of getting your brain into thinking without actually thinking about anything.
Yeah, I think it works on a multitude of levels. Actually, that's kind of the joy of SpongeBob, and I'm sure we'll get into this a lot as this episode progresses. But we've talked before, particularly where gags and humor are concerned, about how some shows are just so rapid fire that some gags will land and some won't, and different ones will land for different people. But it doesn't matter because it's just so rapid fire that by the time one hasn't landed, you're on to the next one, and it does. Yeah, and SpongeBob is that. But it's that consistently, not just in the humor, but in absolutely everything about the show. Like they're these kind of 11-minute, sometimes, you did get the odd 30-minute episode, but they're these kind of...
They were few and far between, though. Generally, they were 11-minute doubles, weren't they?
Yeah, they were. So you get these kind of just little slices of entertainment. And even within that 11 minutes, it's so frenetic and it's so all over the place.
Yeah.
That it could be so many things to so many people. You know, for me as a young man in my 20s, it was like you said, just the sheer manic energy of it on a Saturday morning or a Thursday afternoon. I recall it being on as well. I had some of the DVDs at the time as well, not legal ones. That was before I knew better. But yeah, and it was also TV that, rightly or wrongly, for a bunch of like 20-something males, I would talk about with my mates down the pub. Like SpongeBob entered our vernacular, as did a lot of the catchphrases and things like that as well. You know, I distinctly remember the theme tune being my alarm on my phone.
I had that as well.
Yeah, because it makes for a really good alarm, because the sea captain is frightening as fuck first thing in the morning, and then you get out of bed, turn it off, but then it's so jolly that it puts you in a good mood for the day. So
and it's a proper earworm as well.
It really is. I mean, again, we'll definitely talk about that theme tune. But yeah, it is an earworm, and it does set you up for the day.
Yeah.
So I think this was a show that, whilst I can't say I've got like the level of love and attachment for it that I have with some of the old kind of mid 80s and early 90s shows that we've looked at, it's definitely a show that I can pinpoint an era in my life when you talk about SpongeBob. You know, like I can see that kind of early to mid 20s period of my life where this was at its height. You know, I'm talking kind of 2001, 2002-ish, where this was just absolutely everywhere. Now, as I say, I've never been what you would call a SpongeBob fan. You know, I don't think I've ever owned any SpongeBob merch or anything like that. But it's also just like it's easy watching. I don't think I've ever turned an episode off. I've certainly enjoyed every episode I've ever watched.
Yeah.
And there's something magnetic about it. It's one of those shows where if it's on in, like, let's say you're in a waiting room somewhere or something like that, and this is on, your attention is just automatically drawn to SpongeBob, and you will watch it.
Yeah, and I think I've got a similar sort of relationship where, as I was similar to you, I was old enough to know better. It was on and it ran, I say, before I went to uni, and then certainly while I was in uni as well. And yeah, it does have that very sort of John K. Ren and Stimpy frenetic energy to it, and there's a lot of that to it, which we can unpack that as well. But it's one of those. You can't help but be lifted by it, be buoyed by it. Where you think, oh, no, you might be hungover, you might be a bit depressed, you might be knackered, you could be whatever else. And you're like, you know what? It's on. I'm not going to turn it off. And by the end of it, even if it takes you the double, by the end of it, you've forgotten what it was that was on your mind anyway, because it's just fucking chaos, and you just follow that. I mean, one of the ones I watched last night, I've had a bitch of a week. I've been training. I hate training, and I've been training people all week, so surrounded by idiots. And came in last night. I thought I'm going to put one on just to. I know I need to watch a couple more, so I'll put one on just to sort of calm me down a bit. And by the time that first one had finished, I said, "Oh, okay, great. I'll put another one on." Yeah, because it just picked me up straight away.
Yeah, it does have that. I think there's a reason for that as well. I think we can actually break that down and work out why. But it's interesting, first of all, that you mentioned John K. And that is obviously a comparison that you're going to make, because for me, and this was something I thought we'd talk about pretty early on as well. So I'm glad you've noticed it. For me, I think SpongeBob is kind of the final form of the Nicktoon. Like, this is the full evolution of this concept that started all the way back with Ren and Stimpy. And it sort of feels like it's kind of gone on this Ouroboros kind of journey, and now SpongeBob has led us all the way back to the start, and it's eating its own tail. But in that time, culture and animation has shifted, and we've moved away from the kind of through the middle. I think Ren and Stimpy always knew what it was. Yeah, I don't think there's ever an element. I think it's fair to say there's no tongue in cheek with Ren and Stimpy. Like, it's all on Front Street. It knows exactly what it was, and then sort of Nicktoons kind of picked up from that and progressed, and we had some very, very good content, don't get me wrong, but there was almost a level of kind of, and this was, throughout the mid to late 90s in all popular culture, but there's an element of sort of postmodernism and irony that kind of crept in, particularly with the likes of Rocko's Modern Life and things like that, and Rugrats, and there was this kind of ironic humor in places, and almost a little nudge, wink, wink, and we know what we're doing.
Yeah, and I think if you go back to the episodes we've done on those, that was something we picked up quite early as well.
Yeah, and I think SpongeBob is almost entirely devoid of that. Contrary to popular opinion, you hear a lot of people going half an hour bikini bottom, but they don't realize that Bikini Bottom is actually based on a real coral reef. There is a bikini reef.
Atoll.
Yeah. Now look, don't get me wrong, Bikini Bottom is obviously a good pun as well.
Yeah.
But it's not like every kind of sentence in SpongeBob is all nudge, nudge, wink, wink.
Yeah, it's not a carry-on cartoon, is it?
No. And what it is, I think, like it takes elements of that Nickelodeon style and of that, you get the macro close-ups that you get in Ren and Stimpy and that kind of John K. almost extreme gross-out style at times and that kind of slightly grotesque animation and things like that. So you get those elements, you get the frenetic energy, you get the absolute madness of the complete lack of plot in some of these as well.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because what it actually does is just take everything from those intervening kind of 10 years and take the good bits and throw the rest out of the window and just reboot this all the way back to classic animation. And that's what SpongeBob feels like. It feels like classic animation.
I was going to say there are certain bits, and if you go back to, even though you like to your Tom and Jerry and you Droopies and stuff like that, you had that bit. Somebody gets squashed in the door and they turn into an accordion, and they'd all be sort of. You get elements of that. You get bits where he gets chopped up into little pieces and his eyes are still blinking and shit like that. The type of thing you had on Itchy and Scratchy when the Simpsons were lampooning it.
Yeah.
And it's like they've gone back to that style and gone. You know what? There's nothing wrong with this. And actually, it's almost as if there's a little bit of snobbery sort of emerged at some point where you can't do that. That's what old cartoons did.
But
that's
there's
exactly
a reason
what I mean.
Something's
a classic. There's a reason something becomes a cliche. There's a reason it becomes a classic because it's fucking good.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I mean. They've taken that, haven't they? And they've got it. Whereas the old Nicktoons definitely were like, this is the 90s. We have to be extreme. And they've just gone, do you know what? No, there were some good stuff in all of that. The quality of the animation, the look, the style of it is all great. And they've retained that. Yeah. And they've retained a little bit of that attitude. But then they, as I say, they've kind of gone full circle and they've gone back to, I don't want to use the word sanitized because I think that's wrong because it almost sounds like sanitized is a criticism. Yeah. And it's not. But it almost feels like, I guess the more wholesome version of Ren and Stimpy then I guess is the best way to put that.
It's almost as if it's grown up. It's like they've had that
in an odd way.
It's like they've come through and they've had the bits where you have your classic cartoons and we're going to have this rebellious phase where we're going to do everything extreme and it's all going to be ultra violent and ultra fast paced and anarchic and chaotic. And then they've gone, right, okay, I've outgrown that. I still have that character. I can still have this bit which says, you know what, I'm still a little bit wacky, I'm still a little bit wild, it's still a bit crazy, but I am old enough to know better. So all the shit that we didn't really need, we'll just strip that away. And actually you've got what is effectively a sort of young adult now, as opposed to having this sort of rebellious, chaotic teenager.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And I think it's odd, isn't it, that you say grown up because you kind of think of the reverse of that, of Ren and Stimpy being the more adult show, right? Yes. Because it's got more adult humor. I'm air quoting. You can't see me if you're listening. If you're watching us on video, you can see it. But the way tonight's connection is going again, I don't think you're going to be seeing us on video. That's by the by. But yeah, it's almost like you see that as being the more grown up. But you're right. This is a far more mature product, despite the fact that it's more accessible to children and it's more kid friendly. I think because it harkens back to that old style animation, I think that's what our generation, at least, and people who are even older than us as well, respond to in this, because they see that, there's some classic slapstick in there. There is some very sophisticated humor. Yeah. For all that this is a show about a fucking talking sea sponge and a starfish, there is a lot of very sometime later.
Yeah, I think there was definitely an element of that. I mean, it's rare that you see a class structure. And I think that's where it kind of leads into the more adult and the more mature nature. I mean, I think the only other place you really see that is in things like The Simpsons or Family Guy, where they build a community rather than just going, right, this is this microcosm. You look at things like Tom and Jerry, you look at Ren and Stimpy, they're all very much contained. Whereas this, they've gone to that wider world and said, look, at this, when you're a kid, that is kind of your world is kind of your home and your little friendship group and your little social circle. But actually, as you get older, there are dipshits you don't want to deal with in a wider context. So you are forced to deal with the people you work with. For the record, I like the people I work with, just in case any of them are listening. But no, you have that. You have people you work with. You have friends of friends who you don't necessarily like, but you have to put up with because they're around. And this kind of leans into that in a way where you do get these broader strokes of these characters. And then you get sort of the interactions between them. You do get some who are friendlier than others. And I think that was an interesting one for me as well. I can't remember the squirrel's name, but there's definitely yeah. So you definitely get with her that there's she's a lot friendly with SpongeBob than she is with other characters. So it's quite an interesting one to see, and you don't get enough of it generally with a lot of shows anyway, or where you do, it's kind of played at and sort of okay, well we do have a social aspect like the Flintstones, or they kind of built bedrock, but actually you very rarely saw anybody apart from a handful of people. So even though they were there in the background, they weren't given any time. Whereas in this, they've actually gone, right, we're going to build off it. And over the course of 13 seasons, 15 seasons, whatever it is, they've actually done that to a point where you can say, right, there was an episode with them, or there were a couple of episodes where they did this, that, and the other.
Yeah. And again, those are interesting comparisons there because they're ones that I sort of link to as well. Like, yes, The Simpsons, The Flintstones. And it is, I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's that community feeling, because Bikini Bottom feels like a real community, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And that's down to the supporting cast. Characters like Sandy, characters like Gary. Even though I know he's SpongeBob's pet, so he's a close character. But you've got this wider world.
Yeah.
But then you'll get interaction every now and again with customers that are in the Krusty Krab, and then you've got Plankton for them to bounce off with the chum bucket, and you've got a narrative device there. Just like you've got Shelbyville in Springfield and stuff like that. So you've got this kind of inbuilt kind of turmoil, and so there's a definite social structure and a class and a town and an element to all of this. And you've picked up on sort of the real crucial relationship of that, which is an adult you can definitely read into. Like, I think there's a bit of Squidward in all of us, isn't there? Absolutely. And there's a little bit of like, oh, this fucking numbskull again. Like, and especially at work, there really is. Like, there's always that one person that you're just like, oh, for fuck's sake.
This one again.
Yeah, how the fuck are you here? Like, you do not belong in this job. What the hell are you doing? Go away and leave me alone. Yeah. Like, we've all got one of those, haven't we?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've got 4 at the moment.
Yeah, there you go. And so the Squidward SpongeBob relationship, it hits and I can look back in previous employments that I've had as well, and there's always a SpongeBob to a Squidward, and it's different for everybody because it's just about that clash of personalities, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it. And I think the first one I watched yesterday, I think it was a season 9 episode. But you get to say, I know plenty of people who do this, where you've got Squidward's leaning in and say, yeah, it's 5 o'clock, it's quitting time. It's 5 o'clock, it's quitting. And SpongeBob's there playing with a paddy. Then all of a sudden, it's like 30 seconds later, oh, it's 5 o'clock, it's time to go home.
Yeah.
And he's banging his head against the wall. So we've all got that. We've all got that annoying little twat. You think, right, okay. Oh.
Yeah, and likewise, if you're a SpongeBob, then you can see how Squidward could be annoying to you. Except,
oh God, yeah.
SpongeBob sees the good in everybody, so but it's that definite kind of butting of heads. There's that, because you've got that structure within the Krusty Krab itself. Yeah. You've got Mr. Krabs and his sort of soft-edged Mr. Burns almost, isn't he?
Yeah.
Who just wants to make his money. So these are all caricatures that we're familiar with, and we're familiar with them not just because we've seen them in The Simpsons and we've seen them in The Flintstones. We're familiar with them because they exist in our daily lives. That's why those shows are so successful.
Yeah.
But I mean, outside of that, I think, we use the term a lot, especially when we're talking about those type of shows, and especially with the Nicktoons that we've looked at. We sort of draw this comparison to animated sitcoms. But I think that's not quite true here. Like, again, it's got those elements. It's taken that from some of the other Nicktoons, but then it's flipped it all the way back of like, yes, there's this community. Yes, it's a real thing. And yes, adults can relate to it. But actually, this is just going to be 11 minutes of SpongeBob pratfalling. And next week, it'll be 11 minutes of SpongeBob laughing at stupid shit because his laugh is funny. And and they go all the way back. And it just feels like just a bunch of really creative people just freewheeling ideas, just throwing these gags at you constantly, one after the other after the other. And again, that's a very old school animation approach. It does one of the things, I've done no research as normal, I'll put my hands up to that, but one of the things I do know about SpongeBob, because I remember reading into it at the time and really taking it on board because it's something that interests me, is it does use actually the old school animation style of writing as well, which is probably where that feeling comes from. Like, this doesn't have scripts in the truest sense of the word, like we would get a teleplay or something for a show now. What this has is a very loose outline and then a bunch of animators in a room together drawing up storyboards, which is the old Disney method. That's how animation started. And that's how you get these gags, because it's not a case of does it work for the story? Does the story need to be this? It's a case of somebody going, is that funny? why is that funny? And if it's not funny, we're not animating it.
I think that's it, and I think that a lot of sort of these the writers' room with this, I did similar thing. I have very little research and didn't have time. But one thing I did remember at the time is they did have the old school writers' room with it, where it's like, look, make me laugh.
Yeah.
If you don't like it, better it.
Yes, exactly.
And it's just no one up me. Just keep coming at me until we've got something that's making everybody laugh. And that's kind of that's the best way to do it. And I think that even some of the sort of more successful British sitcoms did it. Things like Blackadder used to do it, where you'd have Richard Curtis and Ben Elfman would say, right, I'll write an episode, you write an episode, make me laugh. I'll write an episode, I'll make you laugh. And if you don't laugh at it, put something else in. And that's kind of how it worked. And I think it's a similar thing here. It's probably the best way to do it, because at least that way you think, if I can make a team of writers who are going to be looking for these gags, if I can make them laugh, Joe Public, who's not going to be looking at it in that way, who's just going to be watching it, probably hungover or watching it with the kids on a Saturday morning, they're going to get it. It's going to land with them far more than it's going to land with the people I'm in the room with.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it's that working on multiple levels as well, because they're so rapid fire, and because of the way it works. Like, the kids are going to laugh at all the physical stuff. The kids are going to laugh at the pratfalls. The kids are going to laugh at some of the mildly gross out stuff that creeps in there as well. But then the adults have got that connection with, I know a Squidward, or I know a Patrick, because we do all know these people.
Yeah, that's it. And I think if you equate it to things like Clerks as well, whereby everybody's had that shit job. Yeah. Everybody's had that boss they hate. Everybody had that job that takes the piss, where you think, no, I'm only supposed to be here for 3 hours. Actually, I'm here for 10. Everybody's done that at some point in their life. Everybody can relate to that. So you do get that. But then, again, one of the episodes I watched yesterday, it was the Jackass episode. And you start off, so you very early on, they're at the beach, and he's made the model of the crab shack, and Patrick looks like he's buried in sand, because you only see him from the neck up. And the assumption is he's buried, and all of a sudden his body walks in, and obviously because starfish can detach limbs and all the rest of it, he just picks him up and plonks him back on his neck again. And it's one of those things, as a kid watching that, you'd be thinking, that's really, why is it, that's really funny, why is his head off? And as an adult you're going, oh yeah, I didn't think of that.
Yeah, it works. Yeah. And it's even that's a really funny gag, but it's even the level of absurdity then of like, okay, one of our characters is going to be a squirrel. Why is one of our characters going to be a squirrel? I don't know. But she's going to be under the sea. So, she needs to live in a dome. We need a goldfish bowl, and she needs to be wearing her head. And then it's even to the level of, okay, then, but when the sea creatures go in there, they aren't going to be able to breathe. So they're going to have goldfish bowls filled with water if they go to her house. So again, as a kid, you're watching it and it looks ridiculous. And you laugh because it looks ridiculous. But as an adult, you're like, that's been thought about. There's a level of thought that's
there's actual world building has gone on there, where they've gone, right, anytime they're together, one or other has to be in some sort of breathing apparatus. And I think one of the ones I watched was she's trying to break every record in the Guinness Book of, well, not Guinness Book of World Records. And her and SpongeBob are together all the time. And wherever they are, he's in his little goldfish bowl, and he constantly ends up getting smished or getting squashed or getting broken in pieces. And this helmet just gets squashed with his head. Yeah. And again, it's just a level of thought and level of detail that goes into it. Where actually you normally think, oh yeah, don't worry about that. We'll just forget about that for now.
Yeah, there are numerous episodes as well. Yeah, where because of his pratfall nature, like SpongeBob will get squashed, or somebody will have to compress him, and of course he's a sponge. So when that happens, all sorts of shit will start flying out of those numerous orifices that are all over his body because he's a sponge. Yeah. Yeah. So it's that level of thought as well that it's the kind of, it's realistic enough that it lets you go with the really absurd gags. It's that level of believable unbelievability almost, where it's like it's just pushing the edges of surrealism. Yeah. And it's even, we talked about Bikini Bottom as a place as well, and when you talk about the attention to detail, when you look at everybody's house as well, and they kind of discarded tiki mugs, things like that, and it gives the show a feel because it sets it in a place straight away. You're in like Hawaii or the Pacific or somewhere like that. Yeah. Yeah. But then it also, it's sort of there's a wider narrative to that as well of like where's all this rubbish come from, and they never go too heavy on that. They don't go too heavy on the conservation and stuff like that, but it's like, where is all this discarded junk come from? Because these are people things that have ended up at the bottom of the ocean, and now all of these sea critters are living in them. So there's that as well. There's so much at work in here, and yet they just skim straight over it and get straight to the gags. And again, that's a very old school approach to take. And it makes the show, for me anyway, I just find it entirely charming. That's the thing with SpongeBob. There's something about it that I just find absolutely charming. And that's an odd word when it looks so intentionally gross at times.
Well, that's it. And I mean, if you look at the animation style as well, I mean, there's obviously something with the way it looks. It's been used in other things. Like there were skits in The Simpsons and in Family Guy where they've involved SpongeBob. And they've not had the right voice, but they've had a character that looks, they've either name checked or they've had a character that looks very similar. I mean, I think in The Simpsons, there was an episode where I think Lisa was trapped in a burning building. She was, God, Jesus, SpongeBob. And then you cut up to a cloud and you get God's feet's there and Jesus is there. And SpongeBob is there. No, she asked for you to. I know it's, so they've kind of done that. And even when they're trying to sort of lampoon the animation style, because obviously they're not going to make it too similar, you still get a feel of them. Even if she hadn't name checked SpongeBob, you know who it was, because it's such an iconic look, it's such an iconic design, and then you get into the actual animation when you're in the episodes themselves, and like I was saying, there's a very set palette, like we talked about with the Nicktoons. Everything has its own, everything looks a certain way, everything has a certain level of shading, with the exception of SpongeBob himself actually. Whereas everything is kind of pastel,
everything's sort of pastel,
right. But then SpongeBob is fucking vivid yellow, and everything's very whereas you look at the backgrounds and things, the lines aren't, they're not blacked in and stuff like that, whereas SpongeBob is very SpongeBob and Patrick are very very definitely right, this is what a character looks like, and everything has its own line, and so it's quite an interesting aesthetic as well.
It is an interesting aesthetic. As I say, it's got that, it's got a real tiki feel to it. You get a very distinct sense of time and place, but again, it's got that Nicktoon look. You're right, it is those pastel colors. And like I say, you get a lot of those kind of macro shots as well, where you'll zoom right in on like a spot on someone's nose, and all of a sudden it'll start talking or something, or you'll get right into the eyes, So it's got all of that to it. But it's interesting again when you say that it's broken through into things like The Simpsons and Family Guy and the different animation style. And again, just drawing comparisons with those types of shows. SpongeBob has done that as well. I remember there being stop motion sequences that I've seen in SpongeBob. There is obviously I think it was the last film that came out. There was some CGI stuff in there as well,
which was terrifying.
So I've not seen any of the films.
I've not seen any of the films. I've only seen sort of clips and sort of stills and stuff. And just CGI SpongeBob is wrong.
You see, I don't actually know. And this is why I've never watched any of the films. I've had this discussion with myself, and I don't know if I want an 18, 90-minute SpongeBob tale.
No, I don't think I could do with that.
Because the strength of this is in the lack of narrative.
It's normally
preaching. We're normally preaching about narrative on this show, but the strength of this is in just the sheer lunacy and madcap pace of it.
And I think if you look back at Ren and Stimpy and even Rocko's Modern Life and stuff like that, you need it to be short, you need it to be brief, you need it to be pacey and just constantly in your face. And to do that for 80 minutes, I mean, if you look back at the Rugrats movies, for example, they were so incredibly fucking slow. And you think, again, you can't maintain that level of enjoyment, that level of pace, and drag it out over an hour and a half. And I think with the first Rugrats movie, they actually put songs in there as well, which just really fucking blew it. But yeah, I'm with you. I don't think I need an 80-minute episode, because that's all it would be. It would be an elongated episode.
Yeah, and like I say, some of the narratives in these episodes are so paper thin. And they turn out to be some of the best episodes. It'll literally be just a hook for the narrative. Like, this week SpongeBob's going to get a new toy. This week SpongeBob's going to get lost. This week Patrick's going to fall out with SpongeBob. This week Squidward's going to win the lottery. Whatever it is, just use one concept. That's going to last for 10 minutes. Now here's a bunch of gags to do with it.
And then in the next 10 minutes, it's never happened.
The status quo has been completely reset. Nobody's learned anything. Nobody's moved on. We're just in a completely new, there's no overarching narrative here whatsoever. And I'm absolutely fine with that in the context of this show. But what I don't want then is 90 minutes where SpongeBob's got to save the world.
Yeah.
I've never played any of the video games for the same reason as well. A lot of them look diabolical anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't feel the need for it. Like the closest you get to anything approaching a traditional narrative or an arc even in the show is the stuff with Plankton.
Yeah.
But even, that's not every episode. Plankton, despite being like kind of SpongeBob's nemesis in a way, I suppose, it's not every episode. Like you don't always see Plankton. He just crops up every now and again.
And again, that's fine. I think that were you to try and to paste a narrative onto this or any sort of arc, you would lose the effect of it. And I think, like we said in the past, where we've had shows where they've tried to have an arc and it hasn't worked, or they've abandoned it halfway through, or they don't understand it, they don't know what it is. I mean, fuck, we did 8 series of Game of Moans on that very topic, but that's a flaw. And if that's what you're striving for, then it's a problem. But where you get this, where this is effectively, as I said, it's a series of skits and gags.
Yeah.
Where you don't want anything to change, you don't want anything to actually evolve, you don't want your characters to go anywhere, because actually it's funnier if they don't.
Yeah.
And if that's what you're playing for, and that's clearly what they're doing here, it's played for and got, then that's absolutely fine. You don't necessarily need that, but you've got to know what you are and what your product is. And I think that's something that this is very acutely aware of.
Yeah, it definitely knows exactly what it is. And what it is very popular as well. So it's fine that it knows that. And it obviously has been popular enough to let it run for, 14 seasons now, I think, 13.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look at it, it's 23 years. It first appeared in 99. And they've had a few breaks for movies and stuff, but it's best part of a quarter century.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of the longest running shows. I mean, The Simpsons keeps going. Things like Monday Night Raw, which have been running for 30 years. No, this is catching stuff up.
And I think actually it probably will get there as well. Like I say, it's debatable whether there's been a decline in quality, but I certainly think just because they reset that status quo every time, and because there's no overarching narrative, you can just keep this going as long as everybody involved wants to keep making money. And it will keep making money because I think SpongeBob's popularity doesn't really show any signs of declining. Like SpongeBob as an icon, as a character, still fucking everywhere.
Yeah, and the thing is, it as a product, it doesn't date either.
No, because
it hasn't
under
aged.
The sea. Yeah,
it's under the sea, and there's even like we talked about the Jetsons. I think it was on Who Wins about 1 million years ago. But we talked about the Jetsons and how they had visions of the future and what technology would look like, and a lot of it is really out there and stupid, like the Lips Diary and stuff like that. But then they had mobile communication devices and things like that. So stuff like that we can identify with. But actually, when it's supposed to be massively futuristic, and you think, hang on, we had that 30 years ago, that ages and that dates the product, because there's nothing like that in here. And I think I vaguely remember there was a joke about a clamshell phone where they picked up a clam.
Yeah.
But that will never not work.
No, I mean, clamshell phones have even come back around now. They've gone out of fashion and come back around since that.
Yeah. So
you're right. It'll never not work. It would be the same as if somebody had a gag with an old-fashioned rotary phone now. Like, you still know what that is. That's still a cultural touchstone for us.
Yeah. And that's the thing. And like when you look at computers and stuff, when there are computers in shows, a computer will still be a computer. Yes, okay, you might have touchscreen and things like that now, but it still works in the same way. And we still see laptops, we still see desktops. So it's not as if people wouldn't know what they are, but because they're not using actual things and they're just drawing things that they can make look like what they've got. You could put that on in 10 years' time. You could put one of the episodes from 1999 on. Okay, the animation quality may not be the same. I don't know. I've only watched the ones that are on Netflix, which were kind of mid-run, and they were all relatively consistent.
Mm-hmm.
So, but as you said, you can't tell one from another. You can't say, that's season one because he's using, I don't know, he's using a Nokia phone or no. It's just that it's whatever he's using, and it's always going to be the same. Excuse me. And I think to a point where now, we're certainly over time now where we're second, if not third generation that would be able to watch this. And
easily, as I say. I remember I was in my 20s when I first saw SpongeBob, early 20s, because I watched it when it was first dropped in as well. As I was always something I liked, so I was on it straight away.
I was late teens, but yes, I mean it's one of those that I had at that point. I don't, but technically I could have had kids at that point. And then they'd be old enough now, 25 years later, that they could have kids.
Like, yeah, exactly.
Which scares the living piss out of me, to be honest. But it's no, we could be at that point, and there will be families who are at that point where actually they could be third generation watching this and going, I used to watch this when I was a teenager. I used to watch it. We used to watch this when I was little, and now you're little and you're watching it.
And again, then that comparison creeps into those old Hanna-Barbera cartoons. Then we're like, yes. There are still children watching the Flintstones and the Jetsons and Scooby-Doo today, albeit with Scooby, especially updated versions.
Yeah, but
those are still things. Yeah, and I think especially it was interesting what you said there about not dating, because, when you look at something like the Flintstones and the Jetsons, because they're approximating technology in the same way that this does, because it's undersea stuff, because they're approximating technology, you're right, it doesn't age. Like when the Flintstones are watching a TV and it's a square TV, but it's made out of rock and there are people inside it. That doesn't age in the way that, say, The Simpsons watching an old
that's what I was going to say.
CRT. You look at old Simpsons, and especially with The Simpsons as well, there's a lot of cultural reference, which is the worst thing you can do to age yourself. If you make a pop culture gag, you are going to age your show. Yeah. Whereas if you're more surrealist, like SpongeBob is, and you just take those elements that are ever present in culture, as I say, which they do with those stereotypical characters, that's never going to age, because it's the same, we've said it many times in the show, it's the same as doing a high school set show, where regardless of what period it's in, high school is always going to be high school. Like there's always going to be a jock and a nerd and a cheerleader. And it's just always going to be that, because that's what that culture is. And this is the same. Like I say, everybody knows a Patrick. Everybody knows a Squidward. We always will. Fuck, I know at least 5 Patricks that I can straight off the top of my head. Now, I won't name any names, of course, but I can literally give you 5 Patricks off the top of my head now, in that kind of lovable but dim sense. Like we all know them. Yeah. And as I say, we've all had a boss like Mr. Krabs. We've all had a supervisor like Squidward. We've all been there. We've all done it. And so it'll never not be funny and relevant. Yeah. That's the thing. I think it will go for another generation at least. I don't see it ending unless all of a sudden everybody involved just goes, this isn't as good as it used to be, and walks out. But the thing is, the talent has already either sadly passed away or decided that they weren't.
They're on like third generation talent anyway.
Exactly. So as long
nobody's ever going to turn around and say, I've got too much money, let's stop now.
Exactly. And even if you stopped it now as a TV show, as I say, you've still got the games, you've got the theme park licensing as well. Like there's no SpongeBob World, but SpongeBob pops up as a character in theme parks everywhere. He's been outsourced and licensed, so there are SpongeBob mascots everywhere. Yeah. We went to t-shirts, the toys, all of it. Yeah,
we went to Blackpool Pleasure Beach last year, and they've got Nickelodeon World.
There you go.
And the biggest roller coaster there is SpongeBob.
That's right. Universal have got it in Florida. There's a whole Nickelodeon site. Like, of course, Nickelodeon Studios used to be there anyway, but SpongeBob is still there as a character. So he's never going away, even if the show was to stop tomorrow. Like this is now entered, it's entered our lives. It's in pop culture forever now. As a character, I think SpongeBob has got to be up there in like the top tier of, he's up there with, I'm not saying he's better than, but he's up there with Mickey and Donald and Goofy and Bart Simpson and all of those. Like show somebody a picture of SpongeBob, they can go, that's SpongeBob SquarePants.
Well, that's it. And if you look at, you look at your franchises, you've got your Disney, you've got you've got your main ones. You've got Homer and Bart Simpson. Everyone will know who that. You've got your Hanna-Barberas. Everyone will know the Flintstones. Everyone will know Scooby-Doo. And with your Nicktoons, if you would say, right, okay, not to us, but to normal people, you say, right, if they were a Nick cartoon, SpongeBob's going to be the first thing that comes into their heads, because the sheer level of saturation over the last 23 years has been absolutely unprecedented. And you didn't get that with Ren and Stimpy and with any of the others. And I'm not saying that SpongeBob is necessarily better, but it's certainly been the poster child. It's over the last generation, it's been the John Cena of Nickelodeon. It's the thing they promote above all others.
Yeah, I don't know if it's better per se, but I think it's a more complete product, say, than Ren and Stimpy then, and that's the thing. And it's more marketable, certainly. If you were to, for all the good stuff I've just said about SpongeBob, and for all I've said about it looping back and eating Ren and Stimpy's tail, like if you were to put the two in front of me, I am taking Ren and Stimpy 100% of the time. It's one of my favorite shows of all time. As I mentioned on that podcast, like I fucking love it. And the stuff that I really like about SpongeBob is stuff that it's picked up from Ren and Stimpy. As I say, Ren and Stimpy was kind of just the more half an hour version of SpongeBob, really, but it was out there with it. It was just like, look, yeah, we're going to show you arses, and we're going to pop zits, and we're going to be disgusting, and we're going to push this envelope as far as we can possibly push it.
Yeah.
Whereas SpongeBob just goes, no, we're not interested with doing any of that. This is just good old fashioned fun. But otherwise, the two are very similar. So I just think it's the more rounded. Perhaps, as I say, I used the word sanitized earlier, and I think that's unfair, but it's the more marketable of the two. However, I think you're right. I think there was probably our generation before SpongeBob came along. If you were to say to them, name a Nicktoon, I think everybody would go Rugrats. I honestly think now, if you were to mention Rugrats as the first Nicktoon out of the gate, you would be in a very small percentile. I think even our generation now, if you said, name a Nicktoon, they're going to go SpongeBob SquarePants. I think for a lot of people, if you say name a kid's cartoon, there's going to be a high percentage that will go SpongeBob SquarePants.
Yeah.
You know, and it's weird because it definitely does have that stigma of like, it's a kid's cartoon. It's got that stigma. But yet I guarantee you stop any random adult on the street and ask them, and they've watched some SpongeBob, and most of them have probably enjoyed it as well. And it's because it's got that throwback to even the generation above us. It's got that throwback to the Flintstones and the Jetsons and all the stuff that they were watching on repeat as kids as well. So there's something very wholesome about it, which is an odd way to describe it, I think. But there is something very wholesome about this show, and it's very comforting, I think.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, you touched on there, also, from getting from Rugrats through to Ren and Stimpy and into this. There's kind of like an out is through quality whereby you go through. You almost like you have to endure or you have to experience the other two to get to a SpongeBob. And now, I said, no, it's there. I say it's a complete product, and actually all the stuff that came before it, you can kind of look and go, well, they've done that, and they've kind of taken this element, and they've kind of taken that element and kind of put them in together. They've got rid of the dross, and they've got rid of the sort of stuff that slowed it down and the things that people didn't like. And it's almost as if this has kind of been focus group to a point where it's almost the perfect product. It's almost it's almost like the perfect storm of everything that's come before it.
Yeah, I think you're right. It definitely is that, and that sounds very cynical to say
completely.
that because I don't think it has been focus group to that extent. I think that is just an amalgamation of years and years and years of output in this, and having the right creative team in the right place at the right time, it being led by the right person. You know, I think all of that just came together. There's a lightning in a bottle element to it as well. Rather than a marketing. Now, absolutely, yes, it is a marketing team keeping this thing going because they want to sell SpongeBob plushies or whatever, you know. But then it was just a case of, we've got all of this experience, you've got this great idea, let's bring it all together, and they've churned out a quality product. You know, this stuff we haven't even talked about yet, and I feel like we could probably talk about this show all night. But there's random stuff which is very Nickelodeon as well, like the French narrator, which, you know, because there's no real story in these episodes, every now and again you just need to link a scene. So what do? We cut to a fucking flashcard with a narrator. We'll make him French because
why not?
I think I don't know, but I think, is there maybe supposed to be an element of Cousteau in there? Maybe is that what that is?
Yeah, that's always been my reading of it.
Because we're under the sea and stuff, I'm like, is that why he's French? Because he's kind of this voice of God?
That was always my reading of it. It's just, part of it is the why not, but I think that there's a definite choice has been made there.
Yeah, but again, there's that level where you can approach this, where for a certain amount of the audience, they're like, oh, that's funny because he's got a funny accent, he's French. And then there's an element where you can do a more in-depth reading and go, well, yeah, but then is he meant to be Cousteau? And is that why he's French? Because they are under the sea. So are we saying that he's now the kind of ultimate voice of God for these sea creatures? Because why wouldn't he be?
Yeah.
So there's all of this at play as well.
Yeah.
It can be all the things to all the people. And I don't think there are many shows. I don't think there's any shows we've watched that can do that. Where literally anybody from any walk of life, and I'm confident in saying this, you could sit anybody down and put an episode of SpongeBob in front of them and they'll get something out of it. It may only be one laugh in the whole, you know, if you're watching the whole thing like 23 minutes, whatever it's going to be, you may get one titter out of them, or you may just get them go, oh, I remember a time when something like this happened to me, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But I think you'll always get a reaction, and I think it will hold their attention as well. Like, I don't see how anybody And I can understand how looking at maybe a still from this, looking at SpongeBob as a character, or watching a clip in isolation and just like hearing the laugh, something like that.
Yeah.
You can look at it and go, that looks really fucking annoying.
Yeah.
I don't want to watch that. That looks really annoying. But I think if you sit anybody down in front of an episode of this, I don't think anybody walks away without a smile on their face, and everybody gets something out of it.
Yeah.
And I don't know many shows you can say that about.
No, certainly a lot of the ones that we've looked at haven't had that effect.
No, and a lot of the ones that we have looked at that we've really enjoyed is because we're looking at them through rose-tinted glasses, whereas we don't really have that with this. Like, yeah, we're 20 years removed from the first time we saw it now, but we were, well, supposedly fully grown adults the first time we saw it. So it's not like there's this element of like, oh, I loved that as a kid. You know, there's none of that. We came to this and met it on its level as fully grown adults. And at the time, let's not forget, I was in fucking art school. So I was an arsehole as well. So I was in an arts college doing a media degree. Like, I was an absolute fucking arsehole about stuff like this. And I met it on its level. So got all the things for all the people. You know? Let's circle back around to that theme tune. We touched on it earlier.
No, for me, the theme tune is possibly even more impressive than the show.
It's a fucking wondrous theme tune, isn't it?
Just because of what it does. And I mean, again, we talked about Fraggle Rock and the call and response aspect with the clapping.
Yeah.
And again,
you get it here.
You cannot hear this theme tune without joining in.
No, you can't.
It's impossible. And I think that, I mean, sea shanties are doing a bit of a thing at the minute. There was that whole TikTok thing last year with, during the pandemic of the sea shanty. But this is this has been around for 20 years. And, I could not watch this for fucking ages. Just hear that sea captain, and straight away it's back in my ear. And then, you go straight into, isn't it pineapple under the sea? And, oh, okay, brilliant. That's stuck in my head for another fucking week now.
Yeah, it's... Again, there's the call and response element. We're just like the clap in Fraggle Rock. If somebody plays the opening of this to me, as soon as I get, are you ready, kids? I'm straight away go, aye, aye, Captain. And I can't help it. I'm a fucking 41-year-old man. I cannot help it. If somebody plays that to me, I will straight away answer, aye, aye, Captain. And then, as soon as you get into who lives in a pineapple under the sea, everybody joins in on the chorus.
Yeah.
Everybody. And it's, like, we've got to talk about the lyrics because, it's a sea shanty and everybody loves a good sea shanty anyway, right? Yeah. So it's catchy on that level. But then these fucking lyrics, like the alliteration at play that gives it this kind of staccato rhythm as well, that, again, it's just infectious, like it's fucking poetry, this stuff, when you listen to it. Like the alliteration throughout that, like this hasn't just been slung together in 5 minutes. Like this has been very carefully constructed.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of indicative of the show. I mean, you look at so many things so many shows we've talked about whereby they've got a great theme tune, but actually the theme tune is better than the show, or it's a great show but it's a rubbish theme tune because they've not paid, they're not given it the I don't want to say they haven't put the effort in, but they haven't given the respect it's deserved. They've gone, well, the show will speak for itself. We don't need to worry about the theme tune. And actually, a theme tune is as important to a show as the content. This feels like it's kind of indicative of everything else that they've gone, you know what, this is what our show is, so let's really nail our flag to the mast and go for it. Same as everything else, same as the gag, same as the writing, same as the pacing. We're going to do it, let's do it right.
Yeah, and they do. I think you're right. A theme tune is more than just something that starts and ends your show, and this also has a different outro to intro, which is another thing I'm always a big fan of as well. And again, that outro takes you back to that kind of tiki vibe as well, which helps put you in the time and the place. But I think a great theme tune needs to be catchy, first and foremost.
Yeah.
But it also needs to identify with the show. It needs to be at that level of, again, like that call and response of like, this belongs to SpongeBob Squarepants. And everything about that intro sequence as well tells you exactly what you're going to watch. You've got the sea shanty, which, by their nature now, when you hear a sea shanty, it puts you in a mood and it's vaguely ridiculous and vaguely silly, but also it's an established form of music, so it's not like, it's not like it's just some made-up junk. It's got some history to it, so it gives you this idea that, again, you've got this kind of sort of seesaw effect here, where it's vaguely ridiculous, but it's also really good at being ridiculous, if that makes sense. Like it's a well-constructed sea shanty, but the lyrics are ridiculous. Then we've got all of that alliteration in there as well that comes through. nautical nonsense is something you wish, drop on the deck, flop like a fish, all that. So it's almost rap in a way, right?
Yeah.
It's almost a rap in sea shanty. So there's all of that carefully constructed lyrics. So you get that you're going to get a lot of really intelligent gags and writing in here as well, because we've talked a lot about the visual gags because of the way it's storyboarding, but there is some really intelligent wordplay in this as well.
Yeah.
There are some really good verbal gags. You get that as well. And then of course you get right to the end of it and you just get SpongeBob pop up and play his nose like a flute.
Yeah.
And it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, it's the stupidest thing you'll ever see, but
ridiculous.
But again, straight away, you see that and you know what you're getting in the show.
Yeah, exactly. And again, there's something in the theme tune for everybody then, because for the parents, you're like, what the fuck is he watching? Like, so there's that. You're like, oh, it's a sea shanty, right?
And then you can guarantee then as well that you'll have a kid who'll go, what does pourous mean?
Yeah, there's that.
What's absorbent mean?
Yep.
And also, all of a sudden, oh, hang on, this is a bit educational here as well. And then he plays his nose like a fucking whistle. And you go, hang on a minute, you're back to square one.
But exactly, right? For the window lickers, you've got that. He's playing his nose like a flute. That's funny. They'll laugh at it, right? But for the parents, you're like, yeah, it's a fucking sea shanty. What the fuck? For the academics or the creatives, you've got just those lyrics, which are nothing short of spectacular. I think they're quite possibly, like, they're not the most emotive lyrics you've ever heard, but I think they're some of the best and most intelligent lyrics that have ever been written for a TV theme song.
Yeah. And they're so on the nose for the show as well. It's like,
completely.
They're telling you from the very start who is. He lives in a pineapple under the sea, absorbent, yellow, and porous. Okay, exactly. So we know he's a sponge who lives in a pineapple.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, if you want it completely on the nose, you want it. No, it's as literal as it could possibly be. And then you move into you move into the more silly part of it, and I think that we talk a lot about theme tunes, and it's something that as long as we do this show, it will always come up. But this one for me, if ever a theme tune sums up a show, this is it.
Yeah, completely. It's I have an odd relationship with this theme tune because again, it's ever present. I know every word. It can just stroll through my head unannounced for no good reason whatsoever. But I also I don't treat it with the same kind of reverence that I do with something like a Jace or a Ulysses, where I'm like, oh my God, that's one of the best theme tunes ever. But maybe, this is actually better than those by virtue of the fact that it is so omnipresent. Does that make sense? Like, it does definitely sum the show up. You're right.
Yeah, and I think, we talked about, especially when we did Jace and Ulysses and Power Rangers, like musically they're very accomplished and they set a very definite tone. Whereas this one, I think it's easy to overlook this. I think because of the show in general, because the show is so silly and it's not as grand a show. If you look at things like Power Rangers, which again it's run for like a million years. I know, and Jace and Ulysses, they had very definite arcs and they had very finite endpoints. Because this has gone on for so long and nothing has happened, but everything has happened. It's you kind of just go, oh well, it's just one of those silly shows. You don't really need to worry about it, and it's easy to overlook both in the show itself and the theme tune because you think, well, yeah, it's just SpongeBob, and you don't give it the respect or the gravitas it deserves.
No, you definitely don't, and especially, yeah, you're right. Like, who lives in a pineapple under the sea is pretty much it's iconic at this point, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like you hear that, you instantly think of SpongeBob straight away.
Yeah.
So yeah, it should be treated with a degree of reverence and gravitas, I think.
Yeah,
definitely. Hard right turn here. Where do you stand? Just because I meant to talk about it and we haven't, so I'm aware that we're probably going to be wrapping up soon. So I'm going to take the hard right into this territory.
Okay.
Maybe it's a little bit. I don't know. Maybe it's not to discuss on this show, but I feel it's important. I don't know if you remember this, but about 5-6 years ago, I think there was a whole shitstorm about the sexuality of SpongeBob Squarepants.
I don't remember that.
Oh, there was a thing. All right. So there's a thing about obviously Sandy can't really ever be his girlfriend. They're just friends, right? Because they're both inside these helmets and stuff as well. Then somebody somewhere decided that he was in a gay relationship with Patrick. And this kicked off a whole thing, and then SpongeBob became a gay icon for a little while, and then there was talk.
How did I miss that?
Oh yeah, no, this is a whole thing. SpongeBob, as far as I'm aware, is still pretty big in the LGBTQ plus community. Like he was an icon for a little while there.
Okay.
And then I think everybody settled on actually he's asexual. which seems to make sense to me.
That kind of makes sense. I mean, the more important question for me is, who gives a fuck?
Well, I do. That's the thing. That's why I brought it up.
It's one of those. I missed that. That passed me by completely, and that may have just been. I mean, if it was that sort of time, we'd have been in the midst of like all the shit going on with number 2, and didn't know. So I mean, yeah, SpongeBob wouldn't have really been on my fucking radar at that point. I've got to be honest. But it's one of those, and it comes back to. From a creative point of view, I don't suppose they ever thought about it. I don't suppose they ever considered it, and I don't suppose they've ever acted on it. So it's all down to interpretation. And I think it's one of those where you think, well, if you want him to be gay, he can be gay because it's never confirmed or denied.
Yeah.
If you want it, whatever you want him to be, that's entirely down to your reading of it. I don't think it really matters because it doesn't really impact on the show at all.
No, it doesn't. Where it becomes interesting to me is the projection onto this character, and I think you're right. We talk a lot about where there's choice, there's meaning, and I don't see now. Look, being a straight white male, maybe I'm just missing it, okay? But I don't see anything signifying a reading of this whereby SpongeBob's sexuality is either way. Like he's quite. I think asexuality is the best way to read it because he is quite childlike.
Yeah.
So he's very innocent. So I can understand where that reading comes from, and that almost feels like it's a way of placating both parties. And incidentally, I think it was the creative team that came out and said, like, flag in the sand, definitively, like, no, he's an asexual sea sponge. Like, get over it.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was this whole culture war about the sexuality of SpongeBob SquarePants, and I think that speaks to the level of popularity of the show itself and of the character. But it's just always fascinated me that there's any level of reading to this at all, because
I've never read
I don't see any sexual tension between any of these characters. I don't see any. No. It's clearly a thing. So I'm glad you haven't seen it either, because I'm thinking, well, maybe I'm just cold to this.
Well, this is it. I've never read that into it. From all the episodes I've watched. And I've watched quite a few. I've watched quite a few over the last week, and I've in the last 20 years I've seen quite a lot of it, but I've never read that into it. I wasn't aware there was a whole thing around it, but I've never read that into anything I've watched. There's nothing for me in any of the episodes, and maybe it's projection, maybe there's an element because there's nothing there. There's an element of seeing what you want to see.
Maybe because again, if you loop it all the way back around to something like Ren and Stimpy, where there was a great deal of sexualization of things. There was cross-dressing, there was, and it was cross-dressing. I will stress that as well. There was no point where it was, explicitly stated that this was meant to be about a trans person or anything like that. Yeah. It was just like, here's a dude in drag, and it would be played for laughs. But there's not even any of that, which people could potentially see as offensive.
Yeah. I've never seen. I mean, there are 271 episodes. I'd say I've probably seen about 150.
Yeah,
and I've never picked that out of any of them.
No, but it was a huge thing.
Yeah, like one way or the other, I've never pegged that. No, he's a straight male or anything else. I've just never picked any particular aspect of sexuality out of the character. And same as you, that may just be my reading of it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see him as being particularly gendered even in any particular way. I mean, we refer to him as a he, and I think we do that because he wears trousers and his name is Bob.
And also because absorbent and yellow and porous is he.
Is he, actually, yes. So he is gendered, all right? Yeah, you're right. They do gender him in the title.
Yeah, it's the voice, the dress, and and the fact that his name's Bob. But if you take away the credits, there's a very definite depiction of SpongeBob as being male. But yeah, beyond that, I mean, I remember we referred to a mutual friend of ours years ago as not even asexual, just as sexual, because it's just one of those. It didn't really, it wasn't really a thing either way. He was just, I think he would just put his dick in anything, to be honest. But wouldn't we all, to be fair?
I mean. Yeah, I'm the last person to judge, honestly.
So I mean, I think it's just one of those. You think, because there's nothing in the writing that you can read into it absolutely anything you want. And if you want to read that SpongeBob is gay or or any particular gender, any sexuality, or anything. You can read into what you want because it's not there.
Yeah.
So there's nobody. No, I said there's nobody saying yes, but there's nobody saying no either. So you can take it. You almost said you can take a reading of that character as you wish.
Yeah. It's just interesting to me that like this is one of those things as well where you had like the real hard right Christian fundamentalists really thumping their Bibles over this, and it's interesting to me from a cultural standpoint of how far this character has broken through at that point that he's being discussed by some pretty senior people in right wing Christian organizations, and also just where did this reading come from? But I guess again that just goes to show, as you rightly illustrated there, just how open this show is and just how it's accessible for everybody, like we said, and that's the wonder of this show. I personally don't think it will ever be bettered on Nickelodeon. I don't think, like I said, I think this is the final form of the Nicktoon. I think you need to go somewhere else from this now as a brand.
I don't know. I mean, I've not kept up with Nick anyway, so I don't know what their current output is like, other than the fact that this is still going. I don't know what they're producing now anyway, so I certainly do. I've not seen them better it, and I've not seen anybody else better it for a very long time.
No, I think this is the kind of final line in the sand for this era of animation. Like, I think it's not just Nick. I think it's also, at the time, the stuff that was being output by Cartoon Network and people like that as well. I think this just perfectly encapsulates all of them and takes all of the best bits, draws a line in the sand and goes, right, this is what a cartoon looks like now. This is what a children's cartoon looks like now. So get on board. And I don't think anybody's managed to even match it, let alone better it.
And I think that even if you look at, I mean, aesthetics aside, if you look at the style of output now, yes, everything's CGI now because it's cheaper and it's easier and all the rest of it. You build a character model in CAD, and all of a sudden you can use that, you can animate that character how you like.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of storytelling, they've all gone to this. Okay, well, the similar Nicktoon style. We'll say, right, we'll have 2 episodes in one, and they'll all be about 10 minutes long. But actually, you don't get the heart with them, and there's not the effort made to actually engage on a wider level. It's just, this is what your story is, and there's no other reading to it. You can't bring anything else to the table. And like some of the shit that we watch with the kids now, I say we watch, they have it on, and we have to sort of suffer through it. You mentioned charm earlier, and I think that's a fairly good description. You don't get that now. You don't get these characters who you are able to fall in love with, because all of a sudden it's just, this is our main character. We're going to hit you over the head with them. This is the supportive best friend who's always the opposite gender, because we have to do that. And then here's some talking animals to just finish it off. And it's just so it's so formulaic now. Mm-hmm. But you don't get to read anything into it. You don't get to enjoy it, because all you get is actually, this is what we're telling you this week, and we'll beat you over the head with it. And then the next episode we'll beat you over the head with something else. So you don't get to have the reading. You don't get to sit there and go, oh, okay, well, they've done that because of that. And like we were talking earlier on about the Jacques Cousteau of it all, you don't get any of that. Everything is everything's so finitely crafted. They say, look, you can't read anything into it, because everything they want you to get, they tell you, they put it on Front Street.
Yeah, and I think that kind of easy charm that you were talking about, like I mentioned with charm, I think where that comes from is a creatively driven product. I think what you get is, as I've said many times, a bunch of creatives in a room really believe in what they're doing, and they're just trying to entertain each other and having a good time. Whereas a lot of the more modern products, especially, everything now is about merchandising. It's about getting to that bottom. Not that it ever hasn't been, but I think it's more prevalent than ever, because attention spans are shorter now as well. Yeah, and things are more accessible. So there's a lot more corporate driven content. I think is the problem.
It's hammer out sheer volume. Is the thing. Not actually get a decent product that we can run for 20 years. Is hammer out sheer volume, get enough episodes to get it into syndication, because there's still broadcast television as well as your streaming services. So get it out there, get a 65 episodes so we can keep on running it, as well as having it on Disney Plus or Prime or Netflix or whatever. And then we'll move on to the next thing, and we'll keep churning out 2 or 3 seasons worth of stuff, 65 episodes, next one, and you don't get to have you don't get to have that sort of joy that comes with it. And I think that something I have noticed with my 2 is that, whereas we've read a lot into SpongeBob in this episode, but you'd have a show with a narrative arc, and you can bring a reading to that. You can bring your own experiences, you can bring something to it. Whereas now, my kids can't do that. number one, she's starting reading the series. No, she loves to read anyway. So we've got her onto a series of books, so that she can actually start to follow, and she can actually start to work through an narrative, and she can start equating things to, oh well, that happened previously, and oh well, what about this? What if I read this character as that? What if they did this? What if they're like that? So, but no, this is something that we've always done, because we always had that nature of books and TV and all the rest of it. Whereas now it's just 4 or 5 minutes, one and done, and then move on to the next thing. And the way that it's consumed is different, and to a point where it's detrimental to probably an entire generation of storytelling. We're getting to that point now where you look at the majority of output is 30-second TikTok videos, 2-minute YouTube clips. Nobody is doing long form work anymore because the attention isn't there, but also there's seemingly not a desire for it.
It's ironic, isn't it? Because we're singing the praises of SpongeBob, but then also I think maybe it's partly responsible, and only in as much as, when you talk about how things are consumed now. So you're right, there is still network television and people still go for syndication, but ultimately, the money now is in streaming. We all know that. Yeah. And because things shift to streaming, like SpongeBob is always readily available for everyone all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, now you can buy it on Amazon. It's freely available on Netflix in the UK. It's probably all over YouTube as well, but please pay for your content, everybody. But what I'm saying is it is there. Okay, yeah. So if you're producing a modern show, let's say Peppa Pig, whatever you want to, right? And I know Peppa's probably aimed at a younger audience, but whatever. Okay, you are automatically now pitched against SpongeBob Squarepants because that is available for children.
Yeah.
Okay, still, and will be now forever, because it's very popular. It's always going to be on a streaming service somewhere. Yeah. The same as, it's very difficult to break through as an animated sitcom, because you've always got The Simpsons and you're always going to be going up against that. I think the only real animated sitcom, well, there's been two, hasn't there, really, in the last 20 years that have managed to break through. Family Guy has broken through and Rick and Morty have broken through. Other than that, everything else just kind of dies a death because you're not The Simpsons and The Simpsons is available. And so I think maybe there's an element of that with SpongeBob. And it's interesting as well that you mention, TikTok and social media and things like that, because actually so much of that is based on SpongeBob memes. And and that's so much of those 30-second videos will have the French narrator on them, or they'll have a voiceover from SpongeBob, or they'll lift a gag from SpongeBob. Yeah. And I think what you've got now is that first generation that grew up on it, the generation that are now in their 20s.
Yeah.
They've absorbed it and now they're feeding it back. But what you won't get with the generation that's being raised now, then, as you say, like with your two, if you don't try and combat that, is they won't have that narrative language to be able to go and make a TikTok and feed it back, because they haven't had SpongeBob feed into them to teach them. Yes, it's not teaching traditional storytelling, as we've said, because there is no arc, but it's certainly very good at teaching people how to land a gag and how to string gags together into a routine.
Yeah.
That it does very, very well. And so that's kind of what's being fed back now to the younger audience through TikTok. So I guess actually it has had an even broader cultural impact than we initially gave it credit for.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have thought of that had you not just brought that up. But as you were talking about it, the dots just fell into place. I connected all the dots in my head, and it makes perfect sense now because, I mean, I've dabbled with TikTok, if I'm honest. I don't really understand it. I'm a crusty old man. But 90% of what I saw when I went on there was either like kids doing some sort of weird fucking dance or people ripping off SpongeBob. Like it's everywhere. And
like you look at it now, I mean, like I think it's everywhere. Like Facebook have brought out, is it Reels? I think they're called, and again, they're 30-second videos, which I think they just left straight off TikTok. And you think, well, what's the point? No, what is the point in these? And it's just people. I say people making gags.
Yeah,
and that's
remember when we used to call those shorts? Like, it's not a new thing. It's just they're more accessible. That's the thing.
That's the thing, and they're more pervasive now. I think.
As you say, I think entertainment has changed, and I think delivery has changed, and I think attention spans have changed.
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, if you were to talk to the generation that came before us, of our generation, they'd probably say the same thing.
Yeah, they absolutely would. I think that is just us being old. But I think definitely you can see that. You can see the effect. You can see the actual cultural effect of this show in today's content creators. You definitely can. So that's an interesting thing to have brought up as well, right at the end of the show as well. Well done. It's getting late in the night, and you managed to hit on something quite profound there.
Yeah, just getting started.
Like I said right back at the start, I literally think you could talk about this show all night, and the more you talk about it, the more you can pull out of it, because it is such an open book, and it's done with such care, attention, and craft.
Yeah.
It's just a wonderful show. It's a good time. It's entertaining.
Yeah, and I think the thing for me, and so we kind of branching into sort of summing up, I think, but the thing for me is it's never one that I consider like we're at what, episode 98 of the show or something like that now. I mean, we're getting pretty high in the numbers now for shows, and it's not something I've ever really thought about as being it's no, because it came later. It's never really been ingrained as something like Thundercats or Transformers or He-Man or these things that we watched when we were kids. This is something that came about for me the same time that things like Family Guy did, where it's like, okay, this is stuff I associate with being a young adult as opposed to being a child. But then as you get into it, and as we've done here over the last hour and change, is that actually there's so much to this show. And when you start breaking it down, the social impact, the cultural impact, just the general pervasiveness of SpongeBob in media, it's it's a far bigger entity than I've ever given it credit for.
I totally agree. Until we sat down to do this episode of the show, I don't think I'd ever really thought in depth about SpongeBob, and I don't think I'd ever questioned it, just because it was so pervasive and it was everywhere. It's just a thing that was.
Yeah.
It was there, and I've watched a hell of a lot of it in my time. And again, I didn't realize just how much until I started watching it again and really thought about it and thought about what it meant to me and where it came from. It was just a thing that was there and has always been there. But yeah, when you actually sit down and break that down and look at what this is, like, I think you kind of have to put this in top tier animated shows. And when I say that, I'm not talking about putting it along the top tier of Nicktoons, like, your Rugrats and your Rocco and stuff like that. I'm talking about you're putting this right up there with the Simpsons and the Flintstones and the Jetsons. You're putting it right up there, and Scooby-Doo and all of those, with those shows that have endured for generations and generations, because this will too. I've no doubt about it.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Everything about it is quality. Even now, as I say, when there is debatably being a backslide in quality, but the same's true of the Simpsons, same's true of Family Guy. You run a show long enough, it's eventually gonna start eating its own tail, and you
eventually run out of steam, don't you? Because there's only so many things you can do, and I think the only way to combat that is the way the Simpsons done, where they do try and make cultural references, and that is a death knell to a show like this, because you start aging it, and all of a sudden people won't. I don't watch that old shit.
Yep, exactly. Whereas as it is, it can stay current. So it's current for kids.
Yeah.
It's always funny because the gags are timeless. Yeah, it's a wonderful, wonderful show. It really is. And I didn't realize just how good you're right. I didn't realize how good it was until we actually sat down and critically looked at it.
I have never thought, it's just, as I said, something that's been there. And if it's on, I'll watch it. I've never thought about this show in any degree of detail before. And coming at it this week, so I think I started looking at it on Friday. So I've had 5 days of it, and I'm going back. I think if there weren't 270 episodes, I might actually go back and pick up a few more. But it's the sort of thing that it doesn't matter if I don't watch it for another 10 years.
No, I can jump right back in.
I can jump back in, and it will be exactly the same. And it will have the same effect because of that. Because of that sheer fact, it doesn't change. It doesn't age. I mean, you can with the ones that are on Netflix, so the earlier ones, the season 4 ones. The only thing that's different, I said there is there's a definite difference. It's to do with the pacing. It's tighter, it's slicker when you get further in. It's not better, it's not worse. It's just smoother.
Yeah.
And I think that's the only difference with it. But yeah, I mean, it's just been it's been a long week. The kids are off school because of fucking half term, and this has been a welcome distraction. I've got to be honest.
It's a joy. It is a joyous show. Not in the same level that Fraggle Rock is, where that's
it's a different type of joy.
Unadulterated joy.
Yeah, this
is just a joy to watch. It's entertaining. You can switch your brain off. I've never ever watched an episode and not laughed.
No,
like there's always a laugh out loud funny moment in there. It's fucking wonderful. So yeah, I may not have grown up with it in the same way that today's generation has, but it's definitely got a place, in my heart, if I'm honest. Like, that sounds dramatic, but it has. Like, there's an element of watching it where I go like, yes, I remember this from when I was younger, and yes, I kind of still love it, and I think I always will. Just a fucking quality product through and through.
Yeah, I agree. Would love to hear what people think. I say it's such a such a widely appealing, such a broad stroke show. I think that there'll be people out there you would never expect to sort of, to take this on board. So yeah, we'd love to know what people think, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on SpongeBob. On Twitter, you can get in touch at SMPDPod. You can go to our website, ddpodcast.net, where you can pick up our previous episodes and our other shows as well. Wherever you get your podcast from, subscribe, leave us a message, and we'll get back to you as best we can. Until next time.
See you later.